Awesome, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of It Is What It Is podcast. I'm your host, Cody Kelly. Thank you for tuning in. Look, I had to come with a special episode today because I've really been waiting for something newsworthy to happen. Usually I go live on Mondays, but today we switched it up just for this week. But as always, if you want to keep seeing amazing content, please subscribe. Once it pops up, hopefully it pops up, to the link below. YouTube at CV Space K. Let me know that you're out there. Also engaged. You know, this is a live show, and with a live show, you can interact with us. We'll interact with you. I have an amazing guest, Nick Peterson. I'm allowed Nick to introduce himself. We're going to cover what's at stake for Georgia and the U.S. Nick, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. It's good to be with you all on this evening. Hope that you all are doing well. Thanks, Cody, for inviting me to be a part of the show on tonight. I'm Nick Peterson. I'm a PhD candidate in the religion department at Emory University down here in Atlanta, Georgia. My family has been here. We've been here for this is our 5th year down here. We moved here from Pennsylvania, and we traded one battleground state for another battleground state. So ironically enough, during the entire election cycle, we were bombarded with all the calls, all of the texts, making sure that we were voting in Pennsylvania. And as we responded, we're actually here in Georgia. So Georgia's been a very interesting state. I'm sure we'll have some cool things to talk about, taking place down here in Georgia and what the landscape is looking like. But again, thanks, Cody, for having me. And I'm excited for this conversation. So.
Oh, I appreciate you. Look, let's get into it. So we've now had 2 debates, and I think there's another debate scheduled. Let's start with Reverend Warnock versus Senator Kelly Loeffler, right? We'll go with the obvious. In my opinion, I think Warnock held back, right? I think it was an issue of optics. I felt like he didn't want the stereotypical image of a black male and aggression to take place. He also tried to really distance himself from the truth that he is. He's a pastor, he's a preacher, and a lot of it was thrown against him where he should have used it, to me, as a really strategic point to pivot. So I want to start with there. In your opinion, who won that debate?
I think I would probably flip it. I don't know that winning the debate does much. To me, it's the question of who has more to lose in however that debate sort of plays out. And I think it is definitely the case that Warnock has more to lose than Loeffler, in the sense that she is, even though she's only been in the Senate since January, as an appointment after Johnny Isakson retired. But I think as an opponent to the incumbent, there's definitely more for Kelly to lose in terms of Senator Loeffler to lose in terms of losing her current seat. But I think there is more for Warnock to lose in terms of actually shifting the balance of the Senate. So in that respect, I definitely agree with you. I think it was a lackluster performance for Warnock. And I think some of the opportunities that he could have had, probably if he had had some better strategic coaching, would have really helped him sort of reach, I think, his target audience. There's no question that he's got the black vote, right? So Atlanta is Warnock. That's kind of a given. But he needs to speak to the suburbs, right? The Atlanta suburbs. He's not going to pick up much in the rural areas. The best he can hope for there is that people actually don't come out to vote. But I think in terms of like some of these surrounding suburbs, Cobb County, Northern Gwinnett County, Forsyth, and some of these areas that surround that make up the Atlanta metropolitan area, I think he really did need to speak to those voters. And one of the ways that I think he could have done that was I think he really, really could have played up the King piece. Because King is now everybody's hero, right? King's got McDonald's commercials. He's got Nike commercials. His voice is on Ford commercials during the Super Bowl. So there's this sense that, everybody feels like they can resonate with King. And he's preaching every Sunday, right, in the same church that King preached in, that King's father pastored. So I think in that respect, there's a way that if there had been a little bit more strategic sort of preparation, finding ways to leverage that narrative, that desire for justice, that desire for unity and unity in diversity and strength in diversity. Those are some things that he could have really highlighted, and did the Kamala Harris technique of pointing right to the camera, and even the televangelist. I mean, I think she picked it up from Benny Hinn. I'm gonna look right into the camera and tell you, what you need to do and what you need to hear. So I think that in that respect, it was not Warnock's best performance. All that being said, I mean, Loeffler,
terrible.
I felt like I was just listening to trigger words. It was literally like, just, okay, let me look down at my note. Okay. Radical left.
Right.
Let me look. Okay, what? I said that 5 times. Okay, I need to say that 7 more times according to my, okay, what else do I need to say? Socialism, Green New Deal. Okay, I said that 7 times. Okay, that's good. What else do I need to say? Jeremiah Wright, So she had these kind of touchstones, again, that speak to that same demographic, right? These people who are concerned, who are still concerned, especially in the wake of the proliferation of the Black Lives Matter movement over this last summer, where everybody was home and watching the unfoldings across the major metropolitan areas in the city. She's speaking to all of the kind of code words that stoke fear, that stoke, that really drive a particular kind of conservatism.
Right.
And she just, flat-faced said those over and over and over and over and over. So that's my initial kind of take.
How come the Republicans are so good at branding, at brand messaging? As you mentioned, the keywords, she mentioned at least 100 times the American dream. And then on the flip side, the nightmare was radical liberalism, right? Yeah. Like another nuance to liberalism. This is radical. This is something dangerous. It seems like they're great at branding, right? Like they're the thinkers behind, I feel like, all McDonald's phrases at this point. Like they just come up with new stuff. But it seems like the Democrats don't take that. They try to explain their positioning and their strategy without actually putting a label on it for whatever reason. And then when they do come with the label, it usually backfires, right? Why is dog whistling the only tactic it seems like the Republicans are using in these elections?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly under, Republicanism / Trumpism, I think what we have and what we've witnessed is that we've witnessed the extent to which bombardment and overwhelming the public with constant, just a constant assault of misinformation, flat out lies, half truths, but always staying in the airways, always, the camera never turns away from the president. And it's not because the president is governing, but it's because the president is completely cavalier in what he says. And so what that does is that actually sets the frame of the conversation. And so because the Republicans under this particular, especially under this administration, have the opportunity to set the frame of the conversation, anything that the Democrats are saying is always just a response to that. So it's always a kind of, in some regards, like a tit for tat. It's almost like you're arguing with your parents. If your parents have set the parameter about what the rules of engagement are, then all you can do is sort of operate within that. And so I think that that's why it's very, very difficult for Democrats to get a head start, is because they can't frame the discourse. The discourse is already framed, and it's being framed every single tweet that the president sends out. And there's just, I think with that, it just gets to be really, really, really difficult to get on the offensive when you're always kind of having to defend the attacks that are levied against the party that's actually not in control.
It's true. Do you think, before the runoff, when we were doing the election for everybody, now we have this special runoff, Reverend Warnock was up over 300,000 votes, right? Do you see a major shifting in that? Is because of the fact that, Biden won Georgia first time since Jimmy Carter, do you think that will have a negative connotation and there could possibly be a swing of 300,000 plus votes in the wrong direction? Or do you think that pretty much it will stay the same and Warnock will take that seat?
I think it has the potential to stay the same. And one of the reasons why I say that is because that part of what made this election work to some extent in the Democrats' favor really has to do with some of the groundwork that Stacey Abrams laid here in making sure that voting was accessible for people, encouraging absentee ballots, encouraging early voting, all of those things, and allow, like, having that lead ground of just constantly, churches were conscripted in the project, making sure that their membership was engaged. Even my own church here was doing, we were doing weekly sort of like check-ins and online information sessions, letting people know when, where they needed to vote. There was campaigns to help people get to the polls, to actually if they needed rides. So I think all of those things really, really worked well for the Democrats in this election. And the fact that the president really mismanaged the entire pandemic, right? This entire sort of COVID situation. Now, coming into this runoff, the fact that those things are still available. On Monday, we start early voting here. We still have our absentee ballot boxes up. You get absentee ballot, the requests. You could request an absentee ballot. You can still do that here in Georgia. So I think all of the fact that people can vote with a certain amount of ease is helpful. I suspect that if Republicans are trying to utilize those things now in terms of upping early voting and upping mail-in voting, that could, folks who sort of may have set out the general election or are not knowing now that Georgia is going to determine which way the Senate goes, and who will have the majority, or whether or not Vice President-elect Harris will be the deciding vote. I think that can motivate folks on both sides. What's been an interesting distraction, however, over the last few weeks really has been the president's behavior and the extent to which that may turn off some of these kind of critical suburban voters who are like, wow, is he just being a sore loser? And even if they can't vote or don't feel like they want to vote for Warnock or Ossoff, then, they may stay home. And so to some extent, I think the best thing that could happen for someone like Warnock is for many of those suburban folks to stay home.
That makes sense. And speaking of Ossoff, his debate was interesting. He might be the first senator, or not senator, but running for Senate seat, first political candidate to debate against nobody. I had the pleasure of watching his, I wouldn't call it a debate, but it's more like a 27-minute interview because his opponent decided to ghost the debate and not tell anyone, right? First of all, obviously there's not a crime. I guess, it's unprecedented, but this is 2020. Everything is unprecedented. Not showing up for a debate that you agreed to. Where do you go from there? Like, what message does that send to your base? Like, I don't care, or it doesn't matter, or is this, and the second part, is this some type of evil strategy to form some type of pseudo government that basically is going to operate antagonistic to the incumbent administration?
Yeah, I think there's no question there's going to be antagonism to the incumbent administration, right? That there is, regardless of who, of how things shake out for the Senate, I think there's going to be no question that the incumbent lame duck president will continue to host campaigns and will do everything in his power to make the GOP the Trump party. And his party. And I think where that has tied Loeffler and Perdue's hands is that they've kind of had to decide, are they on Team Trump or are they some other kind of Republican? And for fear of losing Trump's base, they've kind of had to dance that line. The question that was asked directly to Loeffler was like, did the president win or did he lose the election? And there's this kind of like evasiveness around that. And I think the same thing for Perdue. Perdue, again, who is an incumbent, feels like he doesn't probably need to dignify, the actual debate with his presence. The other piece, that always could be at work too, which we don't know, and I think they could be tight-lipped about that as well. We don't know if the man got sick or if he thought he may have gotten sick or, a test didn't come back in time. Like, all of those things are possible. But to my knowledge, he hasn't, offered any kind of apology or any kind of follow-up statement about not showing up for a debate that he agreed to. But in terms of what that impact will be, who knows? I mean, really, it is one of those things where it's like, it says something about the extent to which I would say the way we narrate democracy and the way we narrate a participatory democracy can be challenged by that. So here it is that you're tasked as a senator to represent the entire state, and the opportunity that you have to actually speak to the state is one that you choose not to take.
Says a lot.
It does say a lot.
It was an interesting statement Ossoff made, and I agree with him. I thought it was like an easy grab, but if you kind of understand the facts behind it, it might have been a slippage point. If he was actually debating somebody, he could have got caught on it. He said, in response to Purdue blocking the $1,200 stimulus this time around, and he was like, yes, I support direct relief to the people for these stimulus checks. The interesting thing is, earlier on in the fall, around August, September, there was a bill actually proposed that had the $1,200 stimulus. It was missing some other things. It was missing renters protection. It was missing some vital pieces, but it did have the direct payment again that was actually denied by the Democrats. Now with this bill, this $8 billion proposed package, it doesn't have the direct cash payouts. Do you think right now $1,200 stimulus check is that too little too late? Is that just low-hanging fruit? Like, should we move on to something that's really actually going to provide assistance, or is it just par for the course?
I think it's par for the course. I think that there is, particularly with the holidays coming up, they know that the markets, basically the markets move into the black following Black Friday, retail in particular. And when you think about the impact or the extent to which the U.S. economy is dependent on retail for employment and the entire sort of vertical chain that's at work in retail. Even though we don't manufacture the stuff that we sell, the fact that we need folks to drive it from the freight ships that come from China and Asia to bring it here, and we need truckers to be on the road to get it from the port cities to the interior cities, all of that kind of stuff. Retail is important. Walmart and Amazon have not suffered during the pandemic, and we can be very, very clear about that. So the idea of trying to put some money in people's pockets before the year's out, I think is just very much, again, it sort of harkens to the logic that Bush gave us after 9/11. Go out and shop. Go out if you want to help the economy. Go out and shop. And I think that's kind of the pieces that they want to be able to do, that Christmas gifting kind of thing to mark the holidays. But I think just in terms of and really what's taking place with the pandemic is really, really showing us how wide the gap can be between the haves and the have-nots. And it's showing us the extent to which those who are the most vulnerable in our society have to take the most risks in order to make ends meet, and still, can't make ends meet. So I think to really contend with that is to really address that would require a kind of program that's addressing issues in childcare and education. It's addressing issues in healthcare discrepancies. It's addressing issues in housing, and not only just affordable housing, but safe housing. Obviously most of the country is in winter now, and who's talking about the homeless? Like we're talking about the pandemic, but nobody's talking about the fact that there are still millions of Americans who sleep under bridges, outside, who are relying on shelters that don't have the capacity to house people because they need to provide some level of safety in social distancing practices. But there's been nothing, that's been mentioned about the absolutely most vulnerable, so much as it has been, we got college students who are protesting, college student debt, which, I'm one of them people, in that group in terms of who has education debt. Yeah. But even the acquisition of that debt reflects a kind of privilege that many folks, a lot of people who've even served our country, right, in the military, who we hold, if they had died, they would be saints, but who as kind of wounded warriors, come back and are not able to access the services that would actually, help them. So I think in terms of what they're trying to do, it's good press. it's good press, and it would sort of support the notion of sending people home with a few pennies for the holidays. So.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And talking about that wealth divide, that gap has increased, right? If you were in a position that you could afford to heavily invest, the pandemic was literally like a shopping spree. I mean, when it first started, stocks decided to decrease in value. And then at the same time, M&A activity still continued at the same time. Because of all this, there was just opportunity to extend or expand one's wealth. Is that fair? Should our politicians have this absorbent amount of access? I mean, traditionally so, if I think about the framing of the Constitution, which is hard to compare then to now, but our politicians, whether it was George Washington, don't like to use him because he was a ridiculous slave owner, but he was a wealthy person. You think of John Adams, he was a semi-successful lawyer, right? They've always had wealth. Is the finite problem is that you have too much money influencing politics. Even when I think of, we couldn't pass this bill because we're missing billions of dollars, but then you think how much is spent on advertisement, how many millions are poured into the campaign every election season. Where is this money coming from, and is it ultimately dangerous?
Yeah. So my redux on on American history and finance and those pieces is that we maintain a slave economy, and a slave economy requires that the production of capital go forth unencumbered, right? And that unencumbered manifests itself as low taxation. It manifests itself as deregulation, and it manifests itself as corporatism. And the Constitution is designed itself to favor corporatism, right? And even in representation, right? So the fact that the Constitution has in Article 2, Section 3 or Section 5, don't quote me on that, but the 3/5 compromise, right? The 3/5 compromise was to ensure that slave-owning, Southern land-owning, and slave-owning men would have obscene representation in the halls of Congress, right? So they wanted their slaves not to count as their own persons, but to actually boost their own presence within the halls. That's a form of corporatism. In the same way that right now, corporations get to be thousands of people because of their money in terms of their lobbying. Now, neither one of us have a lobby, can just go into go into Congress and just decide that we want to sort of court people to get the legislation that we want on the books. The other side of that is America's understanding of democracy and its performance of democracy is built on some form of economic success. And the only way that happens is that the government has to prioritize the economy over its citizenry, because it's conditioned us to understand that a healthy economy means a healthy citizenry. And so the function of the government is to actually ensure that corporations are able to survive and able to do business in ways that would then allow them to hire people and to, create competitive markets that produce jobs and yada, yada, yada. All of these things that, that we learn, or maybe we don't learn in civics and economics. But to that extent, the primary function of the law, the primary function of regulation, the primary function of any of those things is not to uphold the individual rights of the American people, but it is to ensure that our GDP is increasing every year. And when you see this most present when there's a push to have the government take control of some of those things that would directly impact people's lives, like healthcare. And so now we get this, we don't even have to talk about what is actually necessary for us to have good healthcare. We just talk about buzzwords: socialism, socialized healthcare, socialized da-da-da. Well, tax benefits are socialized too, right? That's a form of socialism. That's a form of socialism when we give the wealthiest people in the country these tax breaks that allow them to withhold resources for the good of the country while others suffer, right? So that's just to paying it forward. The notion of the Reagan's trickle down economics is never a trickle down. It's always a funnel up, right? So it's always the poorest, the least, who have to pay the most for the kinds of services that they need. And that's a Rockefeller principle. Even Rockefeller said, I will never lend money to somebody who needs it.
Wow.
Right.
Right.
You know, so in that extent, there's our society is really banked off of creating avenues of exploitation, and at the same time providing a narration and a continued stream of, if you just work hard enough, if you just follow the law, if you just do what you're supposed to do, you know, you too can become rich, you too can become wealthy, you too can become, you know, an image of the American dream. And that's increasingly becoming less and less possible as these gaps widen.
Is there a way that it can be resolved, like a mixed market system? You know, I get it. America is hung up over buzzwords. So any type of extreme amount or extreme measure might be seen as socialism, right? And then it's automatically scoffed at and disregarded, right? But, you know, we're at the point of falling off the cliff, right? The American economy, if you want to keep things going forward, something drastic does have to happen, right? What does that measure look like? Because I'm reminded, and obviously, you know, I invest. God's been good. I'm not wealthy yet. I'm not wealthy, right? But I do believe in capitalism to the point of having the ability to create one's destiny. But I'm totally aware of the origin and its demagoguery and its insidiousness and everything evil with it that has to be done away, right? So I like the pure stance on it, but not the reality of it. And that's why I believe that it has to be a fully functioning system. Karl Marx said in Communist Manifesto, I hate to quote that book, but Karl Marx said, you know, basically people would grow tired of capitalism and then one day revolt. Is there something on the horizon that you see, like you think of the Andrew Yangs coming into the forefront, that we're going to have more of a mixed market system?
Again, I really like to. I know capitalism is a word that sounds good, but I really like to talk of the American project as a form of both colonialism and settler colonialism, which would require the forced removal and the genocide of those who were previous inhabitants of the land, and a full-on exploitation of human labor through a means by which you don't determine it as human. And so America cannot be America without slavery. And I just don't mean the historic slavery. I mean everything that slavery produces. There is no America without King Cotton. There is no America without the modern health industry that soils people in debt. There is no America without the insane amounts of debt that young people, a whole generation is carrying, coming out of college with college loans. There is no America without the prison industrial complex and the fact that that's an entire economy, an increasingly economy that's designed to support and benefit both in census and in employment, small, rural, primarily white communities in southern states, but increasingly in northern states. There is no America without an educational system that's banked off of the racism that's embedded in the housing industry as it stands. You know, the truth is, you can have the exact same build of house on the exact same in the exact same city, but if white folks live there, it's worth more than if Black folks or Latino folks or other folks who live there. And why does that matter? Why does it matter? Well, because that will then determine the millage rate, and the millage rate will determine what kind of resources are made available based off of the value of the homes in the community, the resources that are made available for the local school district. So there isn't a way to sort of parse out the redeemable aspects of capitalism apart from the absolutely necessary forms of exploitation. If we were to just take 3 seconds, everybody who's watching it, us included, and look at our collars, I guarantee 99.999% of the stuff that we're making was not made on American soil and was probably made by a 4-year-old in Taiwan or the Philippines who stitched together the clothes that we're making. Now, you can go around your house, and it's probably going to be true that most of the things that we're using are made by people whose labor is exploited for the sake of capitalist production. And so in that respect, I think that, it is without question, and Marx, Gramsci, you'll find this, is that these rely on capitalism as a sort of a solution, right, to capitalism. The piece, for Marx in particular, is this notion of the idea of alienation, that people are alienated from the capital that they produce. And part of the Marxist corrective would be to dissolve that alienation so that the capital that you're producing becomes of benefit to you and not the capitalists. So to sort of distribute those kind of resources more equitably. But the flip side of that is the only way we can produce capital is you got to exploit something. Either you're going to exploit the land, you're going to exploit the people, or you're going to find a combination to do both. And America, as a globalist empire, has found a way to do all of that. So we exploit the land. The president just last week signed some, agreements that would allow him to sell off large portions of formerly protected natural preserves in Alaska that can be used now for fracking and other kinds of exploration to see what other materials are there. But all of this is to say, in capitalism can only survive if there are more commodities. And the commodities are limited in terms of what they can be based off. Even when you're trading futures and all that type of stuff, you still have to have some form of commodity. And that commodity is going to be in some way, shape, or form connected to land or people. Those are your two options. Because either the resources come.
Water's now a new commodity. Based on the New York Stock Exchange. It's like, Lord.
So
let me answer this. Last question. I appreciate your time. Are people tired of politics? And what I mean by that, I think after all this, I think both parties have to go through a rebrand, right? I don't think the Democratic fold, or the tent, as they call it, President Obama has been calling it a tent. It seems that tent is warring, right? You have the progressive side, and then you have more moderate to conservative Democrats. And then, like you said, Republicans no longer exist. You have Trumplicans, right? You have Trumpism, and the Mitt Romneys of the world are, few far in between. The Senator McCain's got arrested. So, these that kind of made the Republican Party really what it is no longer at least a viable presence, right? Do both parties have to go through a rebrand?
No, because both parties are well funded by the corporations that need America to survive. And so I think it was in this last election, the final number came out at around like $10 billion spent for the presidential election, $10 billion. And it's like, well, that ain't everybody. That ain't 5 million people giving $5, right? That doesn't add up, right? That don't add up to what we had when Obama talked about. We had this grassroots campaign with people giving their own, so many millions of people chipping in $5 here, $10 there. When you're talking about $10 billion, you're talking about big, 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 big money. And so to that extent, I think what we have now is that we are tired of the performance, right? We're tired of the inundation. But I think to that, there's this sense of like, once we get Trump out the way, we can go back to some form of normal. And I think the assumption in that is that you'll get Trump out the way. Trump entered into the arena as a celebrity, as a what do they call those? Reality TV celebrity. Right. Trump will exit the presidency as a reality TV celebrity. And rest assured, like if there's space for Hannity's, if there's space for Neil Bortz's and Rush Limbaugh's, there will definitely be space for folk like Trump. And I think what we'll see is that we'll just see more, right? We'll hear more of this. And what we've been conditioned toward over the last 4 years is we've been conditioned to just handle it and to deal with it. And so for as much as Trump makes people, is fatiguing, Trump is still such a presence that you can't turn away from it, right? And that's what makes for good television. Good television is not just the fact, it's wholesome and it makes people feel good. No, you don't care if people feel good. You want people to watch so they can be angry, right? As long as they watch it, right? If they watch and they, I had a good friend who they were not conservative, but they would only watch Fox News. And their idea behind watching was like, I watch Fox News so I can, figure out how to respond and argue back. But the whole time they're watching, they're just, but Fox News don't care whether or not you agree or whether or not you like what they're saying. As long as you don't turn that channel, they're fine with that. And I think that if anything, moving forward, the Republicans can learn is that you can win elections with populism. But what they will need is that they'll need somebody who's not only populist, but somebody who has the principles to govern. And that's not what Trump's strong suit is. Trump could have won this election if he had actually governed just a little bit during a pandemic. The man got 74 million votes after people saw how he ran the country and how he lied and how he, tweeted for 4 years. And 74 million people, after having seen him for 4 years, still decided that that is the man who they want to run the country. That man would have won if we weren't in a pandemic. And that should be alarming to the Democrats. But still, all we're going to say is the Democrats' main slogan is, at least we're not Trump. At least we're not Trump. We're not Trump. We're not bigots. We're not racists like that.
Right.
But today, I don't think we'll see a turning point because Trump still commands so much of our attention that it really won't be, something different. I think until he's until he's found another horse to ride. But in the meantime, I don't think there's going to be any rest. I think that he's still going to be campaigning during Biden's entire presidency. And since he lost this election and technically could be president again, I think he's going to be the person who decides who's going to be on the GOP ticket. And he's just, and then the way the Republicans have refused to abandon him, only strengthens his power after this election. So we'll hear for the next 4 years that he was cheated. And if it's putting up his daughter in 2024 or putting up one of his sons in 2024, we ain't seen the finish. This is not the end of Trump. That's for sure.
Not the end of Trump. Way to end it. Look, I appreciate you so much. Nick, where can they connect with you, man? Where can they follow you?
So I am on Instagram, IG, and the way that you can find me there is at NARYKCIN. NARYKCIN. So yeah, same thing on Twitter.
Same thing on Twitter. Guys, connect with Nick. He's amazing. He's a thought leader. He's a leader in Georgia and a rising. And I'm sure once his theological doctorate is complete, I'm sure he'll be pastoring a mega church soon. in somewhere here in the United States. I appreciate so much. Look, we got some amazing stuff. I've been working on a few things as far as episodes and content. Be on the lookout. Be on the lookout. It's going to be a wild January. I'm going to do a couple episodes in December, but 2021 will be all heat. I appreciate my guest, Nick. Thank you so much. We will connect again. Until next time, guys.
Yes, take care.